So why is the actual component content missing here? I mean, in our app component HTML file, we are still outputting those specific components between the app dashboard item tags. And that is correct, we are doing that. But by default, if you're building a custom component, Angular ignores any content you have between the opening and closing tags of that custom component. And it ignores the content between those tags because it wouldn't know where to put it. I mean, in the dashboard item template here, I'm not telling Angular where to render any content that is put between those tags. So how would it know where to place it? In front of that div? Inside of that div? After the div? Instead of the div? Angular doesn't know. So we need to tell Angular where to put any wrapped content. And we do that with help of a special instruction you can add to your Angular templates. The ng-content instruction. It's essentially an HTML element, a non-standard HTML element, which is understood by Angular though, which you place in your templates to tell Angular that it should render any wrapped content in that place. So ng-content is essentially a placeholder for any wrapped content. And therefore with that added, if we save that, now our actual content is back, though now I have some duplication here because of course I still have that title and that image in my components here, in my server status and so on components. And therefore we should now clean up those components. Because now that we added the dashboard item, the article and header are shared through that dashboard item component. So in the server status component and the other components, we should no longer have this article and header. Instead here, we should now really only have that div that holds the actual component content. And I'll do that here for the server status. For the tickets, I'll get rid of article and header and also of the closing article element. And I'll do it for the traffic. Get rid of article and header and of the closing article. Like this. Well, and with that now, this looks fine again, but now we're rendering this with help of another reusable component. The dashboard item component, which we added here. So now that we repeated some important component concepts, I want to continue building this application by working on this support tickets component here. And I want to replace this placeholder text with the actual content that should be output by that component. And in that component, I in the end want to have a list of open or completed support tickets, and I want to have a form that allows me to add a new ticket. Now we could put all the ticket logic into that tickets component file, but we could also break it apart and create one component that will manage the form that allows us to enter the data for a new ticket, and then maybe one component for every ticket, so that we have a reusable ticket component which we can then output in a list of tickets. That could be one way of structuring this. Now for that, I'll again generate a new component with the ng-gc command. And I want to store it in that tickets folder, which is in the dashboard folder. So I'll define that path here, dashboard/tickets/ and now the name of the new component, which here should be new-ticket, since I want to generate that component that will then hold the form for entering that ticket data. And I'll add skip-tests here as a flag so that that testing file isn't generated. So that's the first new component. Next, I want to generate another new component, also in the dashboard tickets folder, which I'll name ticket, which should then hold the content for an individual ticket. So now with these two new components added here, I want to start with the new ticket component here. Because of course we need a form to collect the data for a new ticket before we can output anything. So here in that new ticket component HTML file, I want to have a form element, the standard form element, and then in there, a paragraph which contains a label. And here for the label, I'll set up a text of title, since I want to output an input here, which collects the title of a newly created support ticket. So I'll give that input here a name of title, maybe an ID of title, and that's it for now. I'll then copy and paste this paragraph and also add a request input here, which allows the user to enter their request, so describe what the ticket is about. And I want to have that below my title input, but here actually I don't want to have an input element, but a text area, so that the user can enter longer text here. And on that text area, I'll also add the rows attribute and set this to 3. So that by default, the text area is 3 rows long. Well, and then below that, I want to have another paragraph which should output a button that we can use to submit this form. And here I actually want to have a button that's similar to the button I have in the header component. There I have a logout button which includes 2 spans, one with the text and one with an icon. And I'll actually copy that structure and use that here in the new ticket component as well, but now with a submit button and a different icon. And here for the submit button, I'll use this Unicode character. And you can of course choose any Unicode character you want. Attached you find my new ticket component HTML file, which will look like this, which does contain that character in case you want to use that as well. But that's now my simple form here. With that form added, we can go to the tickets component HTML file here. And here I'll actually replace that status ID now with the ID new-ticket. And then here, instead of this paragraph, which had that to-do text, I'll output my app new ticket component that I just added, and I'll then auto import it to make it available in this component. Now, with that done, you should see a form here which looks something like this, which of course doesn't look that great. To make it look better, I attached an updated styles.css file, which you should use to replace your styles.css file with. And once you did that, this tickets component should look much better. So with that, we added this new ticket component, and of course we'll now need to make sure that we extract that user input. But before we do that, I want to take another look at this button here, because we are using that same button, that same markup here in multiple places, and that's always a sign that we might be able to build and use a reusable component. So I'll do that, and then also take another look at the styles and see if we can manage those more efficiently, before we then thereafter make sure that we extract and use the user input from that form. So we got this button here, and we in the end got the same kind of button in the header component. It's essentially the same markup, just some different text and a different icon. Therefore, we could strongly consider creating a reusable component. And that's what I'll do. I'll generate a new component, and I'll generate it in a shared folder, which doesn't exist yet. Because my button does not just belong to the dashboard, instead it's a shared component that could be used anywhere in the application. And I prefer to store such shared components in a folder named shared, though that's just a personal preference and not something you have to follow. But here I'll go for the shared folder and then in there add a button component. And I'll skip the test files as always. Now, this generates me a new shared folder with that button component. And we can now go to the header component, for example, and grab that button markup and bring that over into that button component. Or at least that is something we could do. But now here's a new pattern which you haven't seen before when it comes to creating components. Because what would happen if we would set up this button like this? Well, we would end up with a custom app button component, this selector here, and we could use that anywhere where we want such a button. Now, let's do this real quick to see what that gives us in the DOM. So I'll go to that header component and I'll replace that button here with my app button, like this. And I'll then import this app button here to make it available in the header component. Now, since I just copy and pasted the markup that was previously the header, this button will still look the way it did before. So if we now save that and reload, of course, the UI looks as it did before. But let's now inspect that button here with the DevTools. If we do that, we can see that button element here, but we can also see something else that's interesting. The app button element. So our component element is also here. And that's really important to understand in Angular. Your component elements do end up in the real DOM. You can see them everywhere. App header, app button, and so on. And in the main section, you'd find the app dashboard item, and so on. So your component elements are not compiled away or replaced with the template content by Angular. Instead, they are rendered to the DOM, and the template content is then nested inside of them. Now, that's no problem or anything like that, but it means that we sometimes have some redundant, unnecessary element in the DOM. Like here with the app button. It's in the end some unnecessary duplication, which we have here. Having a wrapper that's almost named button around an element that's named button, sure, we can do that. As you see, we get the intended result. It looks good. But we can actually change our code here to end up with a leaner DOM. Because what we essentially want to do here with that button component is that we want to kind of extend the built-in button component. I want to keep all its capabilities. I want to be able to listen to all its events if needed, and so on. But I want to extend it because I want to have more control over its markup in this case. And if you have a situation like this, where you essentially want to extend a built-in component, you can follow a slightly different approach to building it.